What's up, team? Damon here. Welcome back to the Triarm Defense YouTube channel. We are back with another video, and today I'm going to be giving you the full Stop the Bleed BCon course. Now understand this is just the PowerPoint presentation. I strongly and highly recommend that you still reach out to people that teach Stop the Bleed classes, or even come to one of my Stop the Bleed classes, and let's get you trained up in hands-on skills as far as stopping the bleeding and controlling hemorrhage with tourniquets, wound packing, and pressure bandages. So without further ado, let's get into it. Rain, baby, I'm waiting. Let's go. So this course is basically put together by 4 different entities. All right, we got the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma. We got the American College of Emergency Physicians. We got the National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians, and the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care, or TCCC. These entities basically came together and came up with the best practices in association with stopping bleeding, controlling hemorrhage situations, and what to do and what to use. Now understand that this course was built to help you recognize and control life-threatening hemorrhage emergencies. Now we cannot do that without first introducing you to some maybe graphic images that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. But here's the thing, for you to get comfortable and good at treating life-threatening emergencies, especially hemorrhage control when there's a lot of blood loss, you gotta get over it. At the end of the day, if you cannot bring yourself to treat somebody when there's a lot of blood flowing out of their body because they've been shot, they've been cut, or a limb's taken off, then you maybe should not be the one doing the treating. All right, maybe you should be the one calling 911 and make sure everybody's in a safe area. Make sure nothing else is going to impede on the person that's providing the medical care. So you got to do a deep down look and make sure that you are the one that's suited to be able to treat somebody. It may take a little bit of time for you to get used to this kind of stuff, but that's where training comes in, and getting accustomed to training with tools that provide some kind of bleeding control visualization. That way, whenever the time comes that you actually have to be in those situations, you're not going to be grossed out or disturbed or freeze up because it's and this is something you're not used to seeing. So at the end of the day, you got to get over it. And if you can't be the one to do this, then you need to step aside and let somebody that is able to do it step in and do it. Hotter than Satan's in here. Now you may ask, why do I need this training? Well, that's because bleeding control and hemorrhage control is the #1 cause of preventable death in traumatic situations, especially when you're talking about military and being overseas. A lot of military deaths, especially early on, whenever doctors were saying tourniquets are bad for you, that you shouldn't use them, a lot of military deaths could have been prevented simply by putting a tourniquet on and teaching these guys how to properly control a hemorrhage situation. That is why you need this class, because bleeding control and hemorrhage control is the #1 cause of preventable death in most traumatic situations. If you can stop the bleeding, you can possibly save their life. Now the question is, where can you use this training? Fortunately, you can use it anywhere, but unfortunately, it's probably going to be in your house or in your car in an everyday situation, or you're out cutting limbs on a tree with a chainsaw, or maybe your kid is washing dishes in the sink and they drop a glass and break and it cuts their artery. Or maybe you get into a vehicle accident and the glass breaks and cuts an artery, or you hit something to cut an artery. It doesn't have to be a traumatic active shooter situation, military overseas situation. These situations are more than likely to happen in your everyday life, doing everyday tasks. That is why it's so important for everybody to know how to stop a bleed proficiently and effectively, because you may need it in your everyday life more than you know. So in this course, we're going to be talking about 2 main goals that we want to cover and make sure we understand fully. And that is identifying that there is a life-threatening emergency or a life-threatening bleed, and then understanding how to stop that hemorrhage or stop that bleeding. So this is something we talk about a lot in the fire service, or even police officers talk about it a lot. And you should also understand this fully before you even think about trying to help somebody in a bad situation. Your safety is your #1 priority. If you're trying to help somebody and the scene is not safe, maybe you're on a highway for a vehicle accident. Think about this. You're on the highway for a vehicle accident. You're trying to help somebody that was just in a wreck, but there's nothing guarding you in between the vehicles coming down the highway and the wreck that's currently happening. So a lot of the times, these people don't care about the wreck. They're just wanting to get to their job. They're going to speed by you unbelievably fast, and it's going to put you in a very bad, unsafe situation. So you need to either get that person out of that situation to a safer area, or you need to wait until you can properly block the highway to properly provide care to that patient. It does the patient no good If you're trying to help them and you become a victim too, or you become a patient too because you did not make sure that the scene was safe and you ended up getting hurt also. Don't be that guy. It's stupid. I mean, how can you help others if you need help yourself? And continuing on from that, as far as safety is concerned, make sure you have some kind of nitrile gloves or latex-free gloves or something that you can hopefully put on your hands to keep yourself from coming in contact with any kind of bloodborne pathogens or anything that may be on them, especially if you have some sort of open cuts or open wounds on your hands or your arms. Understand that blood and spit can infect your body by coming in contact with those open wounds. If you have no cuts or abrasions on your hands or your arms, your skin is actually really good protecting from those things, but you don't want to take the risk of a cut happening or maybe a cut being there that you didn't know was there, and now you're infected with some kind of bloodborne pathogen that patient or person may have. So be smart and glove up. So if you've ever done any kind of EMT training or EMR training or paramedic training, there's always the ABCs of patient care, right? Airway, breathing, circulation. But when we're talking about hemorrhage control or bleeding control, we have to switch those up a little bit to match the certain situation that's happening. The airway is going to turn from airway to alert 911, and that's getting somebody, if not yourself, to call 911 and alert the paramedics that this bad situation is happening and we need help. Then our B is going to change to bleeding, and that is identifying that there is a bleeding control problem or a hemorrhage control problem. And then C is moving on to compression or wound packing or tourniquet usage. That's stopping the bleeding from happening or stopping the hemorrhage control from happening. So like we just talked about, A is alert 911. You want to call 911, let them know of your location. If you're in an intersection, make sure you let them know you're on the intersection of X and Z, or if you're at a store, let them know what store you're at. Say you're at Dick's Sporting Goods, let them know, hey, I'm at Dick's Sporting Goods off of University Drive. You know, whatever the case may be, make sure you have some sort of directional compass that you're used to in your area and let them know where you're at just so they can find you a little bit easier. Most dispatch operators are trained in some sort of EMR, maybe even EMT skill level, and let them kind of guide you in the steps it takes to treat whatever is happening. Whatever the case may be or whatever they're trying to walk you through in their protocols, let them do that, especially if you're somebody that's not trained in emergency services or any kind of stop the bleed training or maybe paramedic training, whatever the case may be. Most dispatchers are trained to get you through that situation until paramedics get there. Let them help you. Maybe they know something that you don't know. So once you've alerted 911 or had somebody else alert 911, now it comes down to you identifying where the bleeding is coming from. Where is the source of bleeding coming from? And that may mean you have to take pieces or articles of clothing off of this person. So you want to have as much privacy as possible, but you may need to cut some pants off, cut some shirts off, whatever the case may be, jackets, to try and identify where this bleeding is primarily coming from. And once you find where the bleeding is coming from, is it continuous bleeding? What kind of bleeding is it? Is it venous bleeding? Is it capillary bleeding? Is it arterial bleeding? Are they spurting blood and spitting blood out of you? What kind of bleeding is it? How much blood have they lost? And the easiest way to tell with that is how big of a pool of blood is created around this person. Now, you also need to think, what kind of surface are they on? Are they on grass? Are they on concrete? The blood volume that you can see is going to be a little different depending on the surface. Also, what kind of clothing are they wearing? Is most of their clothing soaking up the blood to where it doesn't look like that big of a pool? All these things need to be taken into account when you're thinking about looking for how much blood this person has lost. If it's an arterial bleed, if blood is spurting out at you, then that's when you need to think, okay, I need to act now and I need to act quick, because if they have arterial bleeding and it's a good arterial bleed, they're probably going to bleed out within minutes if you do not provide some sort of compression care or stop hemorrhage control care. So when we're talking about finding out where the bleeding is coming from, once we find out where the bleeding is coming from, they may be bleeding in multiple spots, but which one is the one that needs to be treated immediately? And once you find that spot, where is it located? Is it located on an extremity? Is it located in a junctional area? And junctional area means, is it located in the armpits or the hip, groin area, or the neck? Or is it located in your main core area, which is your thoracic, your chest cavity, or your abdomen? All three of those different areas have different ways of treating them properly to be able to effectively stop bleeding. If you find out that the bleeding is coming from an extremity, meaning an arm, left, right, or legs, then you need to start thinking tourniquets, especially if it's a bad bleed. Tourniquets can be used on extremities, arms and legs only. You can't put a tourniquet around the neck, you can't put a tourniquet around the groin, you can't put a tourniquet around the abdomen. Now you can wound pack and pressure bandage extremities, all right? Don't get me wrong, you're able to do those. Now, when we're talking about junctional areas, meaning neck, armpits, or hip, or groin, these are areas you can't put a tourniquet and you can't necessarily put a pressure bandage. So these are going to be areas that you need to wound pack and compress with pressure, meaning you're going to start shoving a whole lot of gauze and a whole lot of holes. And when it comes to the core area, chest cavity or abdomen, it's usually just going to be, especially if it's chest cavity, you don't want to shove a bunch of gauze into a chest cavity because then you're going to be impeding the breathing and cause a lot more problems than you already have. You don't want to shove a bunch of gauze into an abdomen. All right, means of treating the core area as far as chest cavities, if you have a gunshot wound to the chest or a stab wound to the chest, you're going to want to use something like a hyphen chest seal or some sort of chest seal that allows you to cover that hole up and plug it up. And when you go to the abdomen, then you have dressings that you can place on the abdomen to try and stop bleeding from there without shoving anything into the hole or trying to put a tourniquet on an abdomen. So first we're going to talk about compression or pressure. Pressure is very important when it comes to stopping bleeding. All right, we talk about this in my wound packing video, and I'm gonna leave that video linked down below so you guys can watch in detail how to properly pack a wound, because one, I don't like the videos in this, and two, it's gonna give you guys a better idea of what I mean by using pressure to stop a bleed. But mainly we're gonna apply direct pressure to the wound. We wanna focus on the location of the bleeding, where it's coming from, and use just enough gauze or cloth to cover the injury or what we need for the injury. Obviously, if we have an injury that we can stop as far as a superficial injury with just placing that gauze on top and applying a lot of pressure, then that's okay, do that. But when it comes to deep injuries such as gunshot wounds, stab wounds, anything like that that maybe isn't just superficial, then putting gauze on top of it and trying to put pressure on it is not going to stop that bleed. At that point, you need to start wound packing that wound. And then once you've packed the wound fully, you've applied a lot of pressure to the interior of that cavity, then you take the rest of that gauze or a t-shirt if you run out of gauze and just place it on top of that and apply direct, hard, aggressive pressure for at least 3 minutes. And like I said, I'm going to leave the wound packing video linked down below in the description, so go down, take a watch on that, learn how to properly pack a wound. Next one we're going to talk about is tourniquet usage. Now, understand that this very first bullet point, apply 2 to 3 inches above the wound. I just want you to take that out of your head and toss it out the fucking window, okay? Yes, 2 to 3 inches above the wound or below the wound or above the joint or below the joint is technically the correct answer as far as applying a tourniquet. But you need to understand that in these bad situations, in these stressful situations, you may not remember that. But what you can do is just remember anytime you're using a tourniquet on an extremity to go high and tight on that limb. All right, go high and tight on the arm, go high and tight on the leg. Be aware that stressful situations tend to make you forget a lot of stuff, especially if you don't train on that stuff every single day, all the time. You may forget that, hey, I need to go 2 to 3 inches above the wound, below the joint, below joint, whatever. But you can always remember if I'm using a tourniquet to go high and tight. Now it says do not remove the tourniquet. Now there is a caveat to this. There is a certain amount of time that if needed, you can take that tourniquet off. So if I am treating a hemorrhage on my arm and maybe the hemorrhage, or what I thought was a hemorrhage, turns out to be a superficial cut that was just really bleeding really bad, and I freaked out, I threw a tourniquet on because I didn't want this guy to bleed out. Well, I threw it on high and tight, I put the tourniquet on it, and I've assessed this person, I've assessed every part of his body, there's no other injury, and I look at this wound, it's not bleeding, it doesn't look as bad as it did. You can take that tourniquet off and just apply dressings and stop the bleeding with pressure. All right, they may not need that tourniquet. But if it's been 2 hours, then you need to leave that tourniquet on. At that point, you need to leave the tourniquet on until they get to a definitive care facility to where a surgeon or a doctor can take that off. There's different levels of stuff that starts happening, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, the tourniquet's been on. But also understand, just because you tourniquet to their body, whether it be an arm or a leg, they are not going to lose that limb. Let me repeat that. They will not lose a limb with tourniquet usage. All right, this was a big issue a long time ago whenever doctors said tourniquets were okay, and then they changed their mind and said tourniquets are bad, you'll lose a limb, and now they changed their mind back and said use a tourniquet if freaking able, okay? Tourniquets will not cause you to lose a limb, so do not be afraid to use one if the situation needs it. Now, tourniquets can be applied to yourself and others, all right? I'm gonna leave link down below. I have multiple tourniquet videos, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave link down below my best tourniquet video that I have that's gonna give you the best description and teach you guys the best method as far as applying tourniquets to yourself and others. So if you have time, go ahead and click the link down below for the tourniquet video. Take a watch at that if you have time. Learn some stuff about tourniquets because I promise you it's gonna be good. Now understand when you're putting these tourniquets on that they do hurt. All right, a lot of times people say it may feel like their arm or leg is breaking. A lot of times you may get people that scream and yell and cuss you out and say that you're breaking their arm, you're breaking their leg. Like it's either I put this tourniquet on you or you're gonna die from blood loss. That's your options. What that means is that if you are by yourself, it may be difficult to put the tourniquet on somebody if they're not helping you do it. Or if you have somebody in the area, a bystander, you may have to have them come help you hold this person down while you put this tourniquet on their arm or their leg. It may not be a good situation, but saving their life is more important than what they're feeling at the moment. All this slide is basically showing is different styles of tourniquets that have been approved by the foreign entities that put this stuff together. In my recommendation, I strongly recommend that you use a Cat 7 tourniquet from My Medic. I've actually used and I like and are vetted. Some people like the Rats tourniquet. I don't really like it. I've never used it and I can't really vouch for it. But I have used a Cat 7 tourniquet overseas in a lot of military training and real life situations, both overseas and as a firefighter paramedic. And I can vouch for the usefulness and how well a Cat 7 tourniquet works. And I will leave links down below for different tourniquets that I strongly recommend. So you guys can look at them. If you want to buy them, I strongly recommend you buy them. I've got multiple in my car, in my house myself. I recommend you have some in your car, in your vehicles, in your house, just in case something was to happen, you have them on you. Now this is for those mama bears and papa bears that have kids, or maybe those dog lovers and cat lovers, or pig lovers, whatever the case may be. This is for you guys. All right, understand that when it comes to wound packing, you can wound pack a child or a baby or a cat or a dog the same as you can a human. Okay, making sure you're packing that wound, applying pressure to the interior of that cavity, and then wrapping it and applying more pressure. All right, pressure stops the bleeding in situations where it's not an arterial bleed. But when it comes to tourniquet usage, you have to understand that Cat 7 tourniquets, Softy Y tourniquets, Rat tourniquets, whatever the case may be too large for your 2-year-old's leg or arm. All right, so that's why I said earlier, make sure you go down to the description, watch and learn about the SWAT T tourniquet. All right, that is a tourniquet. It's basically an elastic band that uses pressure just as a tourniquet, a normal Cat 7 tourniquet would. All right, but it's made for small humans, animals of the nature. So if you have kids, if you have children, please learn how to use a SWAT T tourniquet. Go buy some, have them in your house, because the last thing I want is for somebody to get this kind of training, get a Cat 7 tourniquet, and then something happens to their f***ing kid and they can't put the tourniquet on because it's too big and something happens to their child. I'm sure you don't want that to happen either. So make sure you get a SWAT T tourniquet for your house just in case. A couple common concerns that a lot of people come up with when it comes to teaching these classes or maybe learning about hemorrhage control or stopping the bleeding is what about impaled objects? So impaled objects is pretty simple. Impaled objects are usually meant to be left in place. If you have a stab wound and there's a knife in the person, do not take that knife out. Do not take that impaled object out, because that knife may be what's keeping them alive as far as being up against and creating pressure inside that cavity. And if you take that knife out and you open the floodgates, what's going to happen? They're going to bleed out. So make sure impaled objects you leave in place, stabilize in place if possible. All right, we'll do that in a paramedic side in the fire service. If we have an impaled object and we have the option of leaving it in, then that's what we're going to do. We're going to stabilize that object and then we're going to get them to the hospital, make sure they're stable, get them to the hospital to get definitive care. Now, if you come to a cardiac patient and or a traumatic event where they need some sort of CPR and that impaled object is preventing you from applying proper and efficient CPR, then take the object out, start CPR, and try to assess that bleeding as much as possible. Improvised tourniquets, do they work? Do they not work? Yes and no. There hasn't been a lot of success with improvised tourniquets, especially because most people think you can just take a string and wrap it around the limb and tighten it down with a stick and it's gonna work. It's probably not gonna work. You need a certain amount of thickness that's going to work effectively. You need a certain amount of pressure that's going to work effectively. If you have to use an improvised tourniquet because you don't have a tourniquet, because you didn't listen to me and you didn't go buy the tourniquets that I listed down in the description, go buy the tourniquets, then maybe you can try to use an improvised tourniquet, because doing that is better than not doing anything at all. But understand how to do an improvised tourniquet, watch videos on it, learn from experts. Hopefully it works if you ever have to use it. And guys, that's basically freaking it, okay? That is the Stop the Bleed BCon course, or bleeding control course. And really all we covered was the ABCs of bleeding control, alert 911, assess, find the location of the bleeding, and then learn how to control the bleeding properly. Couple different methods as far as pressure and wound packing goes, and then tourniquet usage, and then maybe some things to think about when it comes to children, small animals, and what to do in those situations. Now understand, like I said in the beginning of the video, make sure you go out and do some live in-person Stop the Bleed training and learn how to do these skills effectively in person. All right, you can't just watch videos on how to do wound packing and tourniquet usage and know you're going to be an expert at it. But please take the time, go down in the description, watch those videos, learn how to wound pack, learn how to put a tourniquet on yourself or somebody else, and that is at least a start. Find out more information at stopthebleed.org. If you love this video, if you like this video, make sure you share it, like, comment, subscribe. Make sure you share it with your friends, family, cousins, brothers, sisters, grandmas, grandpas, whatever the case may be. And I'll see you in the next video. Stay prepared, stay safe.